Shifting over to the encore perspective here, this is another interesting facet of the deal to look at because Towns brings a really valuable skill to the Knicks that they honestly need. Somebody made a graph of teams, basically their spacing, the amount of spacing that each team had last season. And the Knicks were towards the bottom in terms of spacing, like open threes and everything that goes along with like having good clean shots from three. They lagged way behind the competition in that. You have Randle and other players like that don't generate a ton of threes. It's tough. There's limited spacing there. But you bring in Towns, you bring in his 5.3 attempts per game. That's going back to last season. Could be more now. Over 40% shooter. That's pretty much every season. He's dead on 40% or more. That's super valuable. And for a guy like Brunson, you think about what Brunson does on the court, you think about what OG does on the court. Those guys love going towards the rim. And for Brunson specifically, it's not that he's going to get all the way there all the time. His frequency at the rim is actually below average. But when you look at the short mid-range frequency, that is where he makes his money. He shot about 36% of his shots last season from the short mid, 95th percentile for guidance position. And he hit 52% of those, which puts him in the 86th percentile, according to Cleaning the Glass, when it comes to efficiency. So now he's going to have more opportunities to get in close where he does so well. And OG, with his big body, great frame, willingness to attack the rim, there's going to be more opportunities for him. And because of all the attention that Bridges is going to command and Brunson's going to command, like Towns is going to have just as much space, if not more space, to get off his threes that he hits at a very high clip. So when you look at all those pieces working together, it makes a lot of sense. And something else that I don't hear many people talk about is the ability of the Knicks to run a double big lineup the same way that the Timberwolves did when Towns was with Gobert. Theoretically, they could do it. I don't know how receptive Tibbs is going to be to that idea. It's definitely it seems like it's kind of a little bit of a counter to what he usually does or like the rotations usually runs. But if he's willing to kind of switch it up a little bit, you can run Towns at the 4. You can run Mitch Robinson at the 5. So you do have that rim protection that he loves so much. And you have Towns able to space the floor. And he's used to playing with a guy like Mitch Robinson. Gobert plays pretty much the exact same type of basketball. So from that perspective, could open up some things for them. It's an option. I don't know how much they're going to run it, but it is an option for sure. How do you feel about the Towns fit on court? Do you think it's going to be seamless? Do you think there's going to be a growing pains? How do you feel about that?
I think it's going to be seamless just because of the way chemistry Hartenstein and Brunson had together. I think there's a chance we get similar chemistry from Karl-Anthony Towns and Brunson just in a different way. Hartenstein, I think, is a better natural passer, but I think you can still actually pass the ball to Karl in the post and have him dime up cutters. I think it's something he improved on a lot, especially last season working with Finch, and because they had Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Edwards, Conley. You have this rotating cast around you. It was his second season working in the system. So I think as a passer now, he's pretty much improved every year, even compared to where he was 3-4 years ago. He's a much better passer now. He's not as good as Hartenstein, I think, at the handoff game and at dribble drive handoffs and stuff with Brunson as Hartenstein was, but I think he's still pretty good. Karl-Anthony Towns, though, what he can do as a pick and pop spacer, he brought an element of that to the Timberwolves a couple years back when Tibbs was the coach, where he would work with Teague and with Jimmy Butler. And he actually had good chemistry where he would set the screen and kind of pop out back there. So I think the amount of spacing that will open up, especially when you're playing lineups sometimes with Hart, and if you're trying to do a double big lineup, I mean, that's the way you can kind of make it work. If you have a McBride who's not like a high volume shooter, if you've lost DiVincenzo, who was their most high volume shooter and broke the record for most threes by a Knicks player last year. So to try to make up for that, now you have someone who can offer that spacing element that the Knicks otherwise might have lost, even though they've added Mikal Bridges and even though Anunoby is a good shooter. Towns is a different type of shooter. You don't see bigs like him who shoot 40% from 3, but only around 12% of his threes come from the corner. Like he's shooting 40% on threes that are primarily above the break. That is a very, very atypical for a center. Mm-hmm. Like Julius Randle, he shot 38% from corner threes for his for pretty much his entire career. but his 3-point percentage tended to be really low. Why? Because he's shooting so many of these pull-ups and taking so many more difficult attempts from above the arc, and it was just completely tanking his percentages. The amount
Right.
of spacing you now have up top so that you can put maybe weaker shooters like Hart in the corner, it's an added benefit that you don't immediately see. But I think when you start looking at plus minus data, it's why you could argue some of Towns' strongest plus minus data came in 2017 and 2018 when Jimmy Butler was running the show and he was kind of second in command. I think you could end up with almost a similar situation this time. So offensively, I think the fit will be seamless. Defensively, Towns' foot speed has always been a concern, and I think that was part of why him and Tibbs didn't get along so well the first time, because defensively his fundamentals on the move, if he's having to be the sole big, sometimes is a little bit problematic. If you bring him into an action, you can't really count on him to hedge. Hedging is hard anyways, but you can't really count on him to do that. You don't really want him to switch either, because in the amount of time that it takes for him to switch, the amount of little steps he's taking, he's already behind. And even if an advantage wasn't created for the ball handler, by the time Towns is even in him so long, in itself creates an advantage for an offensive player. So you can drive right by him, and now your defense is in rotation. And you're starting to get shots now at the rim because Towns is out there and you're playing four spaces around him. You might not have secondary shot blockers. That's the sort of thing where I feel like Tibbs will start to freak out by the time it's January. And that's kind of what happened in the past too. So that's where I'm a little bit more worried, especially when you have Brunson, who's a smaller point guard. Could you bring those two into an action and just cook every time? But that's maybe more of a playoff concern. In the regular season, I think you'll probably be able to play drop coverage enough with Towns, and he's actually a pretty decent shot blocker, so you might be able to survive.
Yeah, I can see those concerns defensively. I agree with you on those points. I guess the silver lining is that
Yeah.
the Knicks have such a good defensive foundation kind of going into this. Like you think about Tibbs and the way he's been able to optimize teams defensively over his career. That's definitely a plus here, and I think it gives Towns a chance to be at least decent, be at least average. I wouldn't say that Towns he's a great defender per se for the reasons you mentioned, but I think he can hold his own, and he at least has the size to kind of hang around and be decent. If I remember correctly, in that Denver series last year against Jokic, he actually didn't do terribly matching
Yes.
up against him. So that's definitely a plus, and it kind of gives a little bit of hope that Towns, especially in this system, can hold up and not be a complete liability. When you're surrounded by OG and Hart and Bridges and having Tibbs as your coach, I think it gives him a little bit of relief there. I mean, they did the same. Some of those guys did the same for Brunson last year, but when you have guys on the wing that can switch and they can guard up positions, especially OG, like OG is so strong and he has
Yes.
great size himself. It's really going to help Towns. So if he is caught in a mismatch or something like that, having OG able to take someone bigger, having Hart able to rebound. I mean, Hart secured a few triple doubles last season because he's just that much of a great rebounder at 6'4", which is crazy. But for those reasons, I think Towns has a chance to be at least okay. He has a lot of protection around him, so to speak, when it comes to his defense. So that's definitely going to help him out.